If you struggle to figure out what key a song is in, it can feel impossible to know which notes to play when you're trying to improvise a solo. But don't worry, by the end of this video, you'll have a simple 7-step strategy to pinpoint the key of almost any song. Let's listen to this first song and see if you can figure out what key it's in. So that was Dead Flowers by the Rolling Stones, and it was in the key of D, right? So that was revolving around the D chord, of course, and then we have an A and a G. So it is what they call a 1-4-5 song, type of song, right? In this case specifically is a 1-5-4-1, but you know, mixing and matching with those three numbers, one of the most common things you will hear in all types of music. And keep in mind too, we're going to be looking at how to figure out the key in almost any song, you know, not things that get really, really crazy, but just the kind of majority of tunes you'd hear with popular music, not pop per se, but you know, like classic rock, blues, you know, funk, whatever, stuff like that, reggae tunes, where you're typically going to be playing around these simple keys and things like that. So this is a 1-4-5 again in D. What does that mean? Just a quick crash course if you don't know what that means. If you have the key of D major or any key, but let's just say, you know, sticking with D right now, you'd go up the D major scale and you'd have chords that are built off all these scale degrees. So you'd have one built off D, which would be a major chord, so that'd be the 1 chord, built off 2, which actually would be minor, all right? And so on and stuff, and you'd have G, so 1, 2, 3, 4, that would be your 4 chord, right? And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that would be your 5 chord. And those are all going to be major. They're going to be 3 that are major in a key, and then there's going to be 3 minor, and then one called diminished, which we're not going to see too much for, so we're not even going to really deal with the diminished chord. That's built up the 7th scale degree, so be focusing on 1 through 6. So it seems confusing, but it's really, we're just talking about 6 numbers, so 6 chords that are going to have numbers attached to them. And the important thing is how they sound and how they feel, right? So it's very much like the solar system. I think it's one of the best metaphors for it. You know, the sun is like the, I got this guy, oh, he's upside down. And that is like the root, which is, in this case, the 1 chord, right? So that is what everything is revolving around it. So we have another planet right here. This would be another note that is in the key and a chord built upon it, and it's revolving around the sun. No matter what it's doing, it's revolving around, and it might have a different size than other planets, so it has a different kind of gravitational pull and also how close it is in proximity. So it's going around, so you could think of this as the 5 chord has a very strong pull. That 5 chord, all it wants to do is go pulling back to the 4, and then maybe we have, back to the 1, and then we have maybe a 4 chord, right? And that also has a pretty strong pull, so it's different. So you got those. I wish I had more arms. I could show us all of the planets here and all of the chords that are built off these scale degrees, but they're all revolving around the sun, and we'll see that this can change as we look at other scenarios. But right now, it's the 1 chord. So everything wants to just pull right there. So this chord right here, it's the 4 chord. It wants to just pull to that 1 chord. 5 chord, it really wants to pull. It has this note right here that just wants to pull right back to the actual root note. I call this the leading tone. You know, so you want to really train your ears to get familiar with these sounds and hear how they not only sound, but how they make you feel, you know, and not every key, keep in mind too, is going to be cut and dry. There's going to be some vague scenarios that we're going to go over in some of the different steps. And, you know, a lot of people think that first chord is just magically the key. And in this case, that is true. It was not only the first chord, but it was also the last chord. So it started kind of like we're in the sun, we went on this little journey on these other planets and came back to the sun and got burned up real bad. But it's not always the case where the first chord is the key, like this example here. So that was Slow Dancing in a Burning Room from John Mayer, and that started on a minor chord, right? But it's actually a major key. It's in the key of E major. So if we were looking at 1, 4, 5 in E, it would be E is 1, A is 4, B is 5, and it all kind of sounds the same. It's that same kind of relationship from the previous example. This stuff just moves around, so it doesn't really matter which key you're really in, just to know that these shapes and these numbers stay the same, and kind of the way, you know, one chord sounds very resolved, whether it's in the key of E or the key of D, C, it does not matter. But in this case, it actually started with the minor chord, which is the 6. If you go up that same little example here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That is a C sharp, and that would be a minor chord. And now this is only minor because we want it to fit, or not, we wanted, John Mayer, who wrote the song, wanted it to fit, you know, all those notes fit into the key. But you'll see, we'll see some examples where it doesn't always match up. But so it fits right in there, minor chord, 6, 4, 1. So it's a good example that the first chord is not the key. And one way to know that is to listen to the very end of the tune. Right, so it ends on an E chord, it ends on that 1. That makes it sound very resolved, very finished. So one more quick example. What key do you think this one's in? You know, and so on. You can tell it's just a straight ahead blues, right? And it's the sky is crying. This is in D, but it's not actually the key of D. This is a big thing with blues. It's like a little bit of a blues exception, right? So I was playing 7th chords, which you typically hear dominant 7th chords. So that just kind of makes it a little outside of the key. Some of these notes are not right in there. But even if you just played major chords, you could. So that would be the 1 chord. This would be the 4 chord. I didn't keep playing, but this would be the 5 chord, right? And that's just it. Straight ahead blues. It's just 1, 4, 5. And you think, okay, D major scale, but does that really work? Like, okay, it's okay, but does it sound as good as just this? Right, so the first example, just playing the D major scale, yeah, it sort of worked, but not quite that well. It just didn't sound like the style, you know? Whereas the second example, I'm just playing around with the blues scale and, you know, seeing what happens there. Like if you're playing a 7th chord, you have that flat 7. So if you're playing the D major scale, right away, there's a major 7th, and that doesn't fit so well, so you want that flat 7th. So that works a lot better. And then playing that minor 3rd, even though that's not in the key, you have a major 3rd. That minor 3rd just sounds so much bluesier, and sometimes, you know, people bend it up just a little bit, or bend it all the way up to the major 3rd, or just play it like this, and then there's that flat 7 again, and then just that blues note. You know, it's kind of like mixing and matching a little bit, but that sounds so much better than just playing the major scale. So even though a blues may be, say, in the key of D or whatever, again, this doesn't matter what specific key it is, D or the key of G, it's not like you're just going to play the major scale. You want to get that blues edge by playing the minor pentatonic or the actual blues scale. So now that you're, you know, learning how to start to quickly find the key of any song, the next step is visualizing exactly where those notes live on the fretboard, and my free cage cheat sheet helps you do just that, so you can improvise, you know, with even more confidence. So the link's down below. So now that you know how to figure out the key in most major songs, where, you know, you just got to really focus on what note is really that one that everything's going back to, which chord is it going back to, which one is the sun, you know. But what about when a song sounds a little bit darker like this? So this was Time from Pink Floyd, and this is in a minor key. So it is an F sharp minor, right? We have F sharp minor, A, and E. So this is what they call the relative minor. If you already know your major scale, you know the minor scale. It's just hidden within there. So it's the relative minor of A. So if you have A major scale, right? But you just focus on an F sharp. Right, this note right here. Or maybe go down a little lower, get to this one right here. So same notes, but now it sounds very different by just focusing on a different note. So it's like taking the sun, and now instead of the A, in this case, being the sun, F sharp is the sun, and all the planets kind of like rotate and move around. It's the same planets, same notes, but they kind of like change where they are located, and their relationship all changes, and they all have like a different sound, even though they are the same note. So it's all relative, you know? So in this case, we have a minor 1 chord, right? And this would be 1, 2, 3, A. Or you can just play it open, however. That would be a major 3 chord. So things get kind of switched around. This would be a flat 7 chord. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, E. And then back to 1. So in this case, it's another nice one where it starts and ends on the 1 chord, but a minor 1 chord. Now, a lot of times, if you get to the 5 chord, which this song didn't have it, but if it did, it would be up here, C sharp minor, that would just fit right in there. But very often, it will be a major or a 7th, like this. And that is going to use a scale, right, that's called a harmonic minor. So it has a raised 7th, and that just gives it more tension, because the one thing that's lacking in a minor key is this thing called the leading tone, which is the major 7th that goes right behind that root note. It's like a planet that's so close. It just wants to get back to the sun. That gravitational pull so much, right? But in this case, we have a flat 7th, so there's a little bit of pull, but not so much. So a lot of times people just change that by taking the 5 chord and putting a major 7th, so making it again a dominant 7 or just a major 7th, and then you get that pull there. And when you go to solo over it, you can play that note there. And then if you really lean into it, it can sound kind of more exotic and things like that. But that is what a minor key is, how it works, and that would be that little exception there with the harmonic minor over the 5 chord, changing the quality, and that is how they relate, major and minor, the relative minor. They are both just 2 sides of the same coin. Now, sometimes a song is clearly major, sometimes it's clearly minor, but with like a lot of jam bands, there's a 3rd flavor that throws a lot of players off, like this. So this is the thing called mixolydian. So it is a mode of the major scale, and we already actually know too, if you're like, what's a mode? The major scale itself is a mode. So in this case, we're working around B, right? The B major scale is also called Ionian, the fancy Greek mode name. And then if you go up to the 6th scale degree, that would be Aeolian. That's just the minor scale. So fancy names that we don't even need to know, right? But if you go up to the 5th, it's called mixolydian. Don't need to know it again. Just know the sound and the flavor of this, right? There's a certain flavor of each of the modes. Even though it's all the same 7 notes, it's the same planets, you're just rearranging them so the gravitational pull is different. So each one has a different kind of sound, and then ends up changing the relationship between them. Not only the notes, but actually the chords that are built upon them, as we've been looking at so far as well. So in this case, okay, it's Scarlet Begonias from the Grateful Dead. It's just jamming on B, right? So you may think, oh, okay, just like a blues, like, oh, it's just B, it's B major. But they are throwing in the way that kind of, the keyboards and the rhythm guitar, everything, they're throwing A in there just a little bit, kind of like, which is just 2 frets back down. And that A is a flat 7 right here. Here's that A. So that is something you want to just hear, because it opens things up. If you have that leading tone, all it wants to do is go there. So a very common way to jam, especially over a major sound, is to make it mixolydian, just flat that 7th, because it kind of opens things up. It makes that not sound so like cookie cutter wants to go there, you know. So more often than not, when you hear a jam on a major chord, it is actually jamming over a mixolydian mode. And the way to figure that out is so simple. Don't like, oh, translate, oh, it's this, that, oh, it's this, you know, it's actually taken from the E major scale. So that, like, don't even worry about that stuff. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, just, yeah, really don't worry about it. Just use your ear and try to find, you know, and I used to not really know, it would take some time to figure out. I would just go to that 7th scale degree and either play the flattened one or the major, and just like this. Just use my ear. Does it sound, does that sound better? Or this? To me, it sounds really tense. That doesn't fit. And that's better. That certainly doesn't fit either. It's kind of tense too, but like it's less tense. It sounds better than this. Or you can do it higher up too. You change location. Like that. Oh, really? And then maybe just try playing around with it. Oh yeah, like okay, that's the one. So then you kind of know, like, oh, that is you know, mixolydian. Let's now hear another example that's not like a modal jam, but a chord progression that's using the same idea. So can't you see classic example of, you think, okay, it starts and stops with D, just like Dead Flowers, it must be just D major, right? It's like, oh yeah, it's just okay. It's not only starting with it, but it's stopping with it, and it just keeps revolving. That clearly is the sun. It's D, right? But look at the other chords. You have 2 majors. You might think, oh, just 1, 4, 5. If you look more closely, it's C, not A, G. So if you remember from before, in this case, G is the 4 chord, right? And it's not so much that it's G, it's just the way it is in this particular example. It's the way it sounds. That 4 chord is always going to sound like a 4 chord, you know? Although the chords before and after, I should say, do affect it. Obviously, the way, the styles, the rhythm, and all that stuff, the way it's played, affects it. But there's still something underneath this core sound to a 4 chord, you know? To me, it's a very soulful chord, especially when it goes 4 to 1. It's just so soulful. So when we look at that C, that is a flat 7. So here's your D, go back, you know, 2 frets, and there is your flat 7. You know, major 7 will be a C sharp, so C. So that is a chord built upon the flat 7. So it is another mixolydian sound, right? So that would be the mode if you're going to be going on. If you were using, again, D major, right? That doesn't sound right? Especially right here, right? When you get, you hear, oh, that just blends right in here. Oh, how horrible that sounds. So you can tell that that is not a major situation. It is a mixolydian. So easy way to identify this is anytime you think you got that 1 chord there, if there's a major chord 2 frets lower, which if you're playing open, it's hard to see like that, but if you're doing like, you know, bar chords, you can get to see that better. If you're playing that chord and it goes down 2 frets, then that's got that mixolydian sound, and that is so common, especially classic rock, especially stuff from the 70s. It was just a big sound from that time period. All right, now you've got your head wrapped around mixolydian, but what about when the song feels minor, yet it doesn't follow the usual rules with something like this? So that is Breathe from Pink Floyd, and it's just 2 chords, right? And, you know, E minor to A. They're playing it like this, you know, a little fancier way of playing E minor, and sometimes playing an A7, but it doesn't really matter. You can just simplify, okay, E minor to A, which, keep in mind, a lot of times when you see fancier chords, if you just kind of strip it down to, okay, is it a major or minor chord? That's all that really matters. The extra notes don't necessarily matter that much. So, okay. It sounds like, okay, it's really focused on E minor. When you listen to the end, okay, we're rolling on to E minor, right? So you think, okay, E minor. But the way the chords would match up here is that the 4 chord, this is the 4 chord, A is the 4 chord, it would be minor to fit right into the minor scale. but it's major. So what is that? It's just one note. So a lot of stuff, you haven't seen this pattern here. It's just changing kind of one note, and it's figuring out what that one note is, you know? So it's either C or C sharp, right? And that seventh in there doesn't even matter if it's there or not. So if we were using, say we went up here and we were just using a minor scale versus raising this note, tell me which sounds better, right? Or now we raise it. So that C sharp is what fits in there because that goes in that A chord. It's telling us that it's not a regular minor. It is what they call dorian. So it's another mode. It is built off the second scale degree of a major scale. All that fancy stuff, but we don't need to even translate all that stuff. All we need to know is if we're soloing, and you don't have to be thinking about the chords per se, just figure out, okay, I think it's E minor, but then you just go and, say you're doing it right here, and you play that note, like, oh, that doesn't sound quite right. Well, just change that sixth. This is the flat sixth, C in this case, and then just raise it up to a major sixth, and that is, we're going to give you the dorian. So the difference between regular minor, Aeolian, is a flat sixth, and then dorian has a raised, major sixth. And again, just like with Scarlet Begonias, you can kind of just check it. Does that sound right? Or that? Oh, you can tell that just fits right in there. Oh, it's got all that tension, right? Which isn't always a bad thing, but that's gonna fit right. And this here, just another example where it's just one chord, and it's a minor chord, so you think, okay, it's minor, but is it? So C sharp minor, so right? There's that, oh, it's weird and tense. That just kind of fits, it's still a little tense, but it's less tense, it fits in there more. You can play it here. So that is another Pink Floyd one, that's Echoes, and that's a good example where it's not even really, there's not a lot of instruments that are like even really stressing that note. I mean, the bass and the guitar is going, they're just going back and forth between the flat seven and the root, right? So you can think, okay, it's not clearly anybody's making it minor or Dorian, but you just got to try it out and use your ear. And just because it's a minor chord jam on it, don't assume that it's minor. Just like with a major chord, don't assume it's major. It may be that mixolydian, that flat seven, or it could even be a thing called Lydian, where there's a sharp four. It's definitely less common, but there's other things going on too. We're covering the kind of like the most popular, most common stuff that you'll hear to help you navigate these situations. And remember, finding the key is just the starting point, but knowing how to easily navigate that key all over the fretboard, like I've been doing, that's going to help you improvise confidently just in any situation. So if you haven't yet, again, just grab that Cage cheat sheet down below just to clearly see how it all connects together. Once you're confidently spotting major, minor keys and modal variations, the next challenge is when the song won't stay in one key. So yeah, songs do not always stay in one key. Sometimes they change. And While My Guitar Gently Weeps is a great example of one that stays in A minor, right? There are some stuff outside of the key, like right here, and there's a D chord in there too, which is outside, the key a little bit. Just again, typically one note that kind of pulls it out. So it's not a perfect example, but it's mostly at A minor. But then in the chorus, it switches to A major. So just like there's the relative major minor, this is called parallel major minor. So it's the same, root note, just changing from major to minor or vice versa. So it's a great way. The Beatles would do this all the time, and it would be just a great way to mix up, the color, the feel of the song, and so it opens up and makes the chorus nice and happy. So it switches to A major, and then you have it all just fits right in there. A lot of minor chords, but they're actually still in A major. So you get the 1 chord, 3, 6, 3, 2, 1. So that all perfectly matches up with the key. And you would, if you were soloing, you could just play A minor, right? And then slide it down 3 frets. But now instead of this being a root note, the same note is still, and that's still, gonna be, what works and things like that. So sometimes the whole key shifts like that, but other times it's just one weird chord that doesn't seem to belong. So the classic, On the Road, from Willie Nelson. What chord do you think it's revolving around? But E, that's our sun, right? So it starts on E and then comes back to E. So that's our sun. That's our 1 chord, key of E major. It goes up to the 1, 2, 3. Should be minor, G sharp minor, but it's a major chord actually with a 7, so it's a G sharp 7. So changing that quality, and then it goes on to a 2 chord, and then 4, 5, 1. And that 5 chord could be major, but sometimes they make it a dominant 7, kind of emphasizes that tension a little bit more. But over here, what is happening? So you think, it's outside of the key. For one, you just never really worry about stuff. Just kind of like if you're soloing along, you can kind of just sometimes ignore it. But if you want to really kind of match up, really take things to another level, just focus on the one note typically that is different. So if this is, the minor one, and there's the major one, the 7th, you can even just kind of forget about that. It's just this one note. So it's B, C, technically B sharp with whatever, it's this music theory snobby thing, right? You could just say C, right? So if you were, going along, you could be just using E major scale or even just E major pentatonic. And when you get to that chord, you play that note. It would sound like this. And there you go. It sounded like I was playing right along with the tune, and all I did was just figure out what that different note was and just play that note, so emphasize it so it really sounds like I'm playing right with the tune. So there's one more thing that kind of helps tie it all together, and it's a thing called the circle of fifths. And there's so many things you can do with it, but I just want to highlight one real simple thing, and that is just knowing the relative major and minor. So kind of getting organized with that. So you can see at the top, you have C, and the relative minor of that is A minor. So vice versa, the relative major of A minor is C. And then if you go to the next one, that is just going up a fifth. So you go up a fifth from C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's G. So that would be the key. Now you're thinking of the key of G, relative minor of that is E minor. So they share the same notes, and they just go on, you just circle through the fifths. Now you can also think of it as a circle of fourths, which I actually prefer. It's just going the other direction. So C, up 1, 2, 3, 4, to F, and that would give you, tells you the number of sharps and flats. That would be like, okay, C has no sharps, no flats, which means A minor as well. F would have 1 flat, and then B flat has 2, and so on. And if you go the other way, G has 1 sharp, so it tells you that stuff, but you don't even need to know that to figure all this stuff out. That's helpful, but it's not the most important thing. But I like the circle of fourths because that is actually the way that music more naturally goes. It goes up fourths than it does fifths. So, but you can think of it either way depending on which direction you're going. But that is a way of really, nerding out on the music theory and, understanding, how all these keys, relate to one another and stuff. But now that you can kind of more easily, pinpoint the key of most songs, you're ready to jump into soloing with a lot more confidence. But knowing the key, it's really just the first step. There's much more you can do to sound great and feel comfortable when jamming with others. So check out this video here where I break down exactly how anyone, no matter your skill level, can jump into a jam and sound good doing it.